in the 06010.
Hello, welcome to Fantasy Focus Football presented by Wingstop. My name is Daniel Dopp, here with Stephania Bell and Field Yates. Guys, we just came out of, I just want to put a little gratitude into the air. What was a really awesome holiday weekend. Whether or not you got to spend time with your family, or you got some alone time, or you had to work, especially if you had to work, an extra little bit of gratitude.
Shout out to everybody who did that.
Yeah, but we had Thanksgiving on Thursday. We get to watch 3 football games, and then another football game on Friday, and then a whole slate of football games on Sunday. We got to spend the entirety of the day with Daniel Day Kim, which was so much fun. I cannot tell you how cool it was to be able to have him come up here, do Only Dan's with us on Fantasy Football Now. I just thought it was a really great weekend, and just want to put a little gratitude out there for everything that we were able to have over the weekend.
And we can thank Stephania Bell for that.
Yes,
to be
thank
clear.
you, Stephania, for making that happen for
Daniel
us.
Day Kim, I don't think he was just like available for hire yesterday.
Yes.
It was, hey, I'm a close personal friend of Stephania, so thank you, Stephania Bell, for facilitating that. That was very cool.
It should really highlight that fantasy football is the great leveler, right? From
That's right.
Celebrity, actors, producers, to just little old us, that everybody plays fantasy football. You could tell that he's super invested in it with all his leagues. And I think he had a great time too, because he was telling us, for just a little inside baseball, about how he watches us every day. I feel like he's doing a show on Broadway, and he's waking up and relaxing before the show in the evening by watching our show and setting his fantasy roster.
That's crazy.
Crazy, right?
Yeah.
But great.
It's a reminder, again, just to be very thankful for all the things that fantasy football does in bringing people together of like everywhere, every facet of wherever you're at.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that just kind of brings everyone together. So very cool weekend being able to celebrate all that.
Only downside to having him on the show yesterday was I did have a couple of buddies who reached out and just said, hey, I know in your own brain you're cool.
Yeah.
Daniel Day Kim,
Much cooler.
drips.
Yes.
Cool. Like, that guy's just got swag about him that you will never come close to having. So if that's the last celebrity guest that you have, I hope that you enjoyed it. But it's also for your betterment long term. So keep that in mind.
I've never seen you wear one of those velvet suits before, Field.
That was pretty sweet.
Yeah.
I did some. I've been doing some Cyber Monday shopping.
Cyber Monday shopping,
Velvet
exactly.
today.
Yeah.
Oh, guy. Yep.
Well, we had a very big show like we always do on a Monday
Stinky
to dive
show.
into. Unfortunately, we got a bunch of Week 13 takeaways. We got some studs and duds. But first and foremost, we're going to start with a pretty major injury. Stephania, last night in the snow game, I was so excited to talk about another snow game and have it be fun, talking about playing in the elements. Unfortunately, it looked like Christian McCaffrey got hurt. I went online and I saw a bunch of Twitter doctors telling me all the things that potentially happened to Christian McCaffrey. Like they for somehow know all the things that are the ins and outs of the injury before we're even able to get anything from the doctors or have any news from the team. I want to ask you, when you look at this, what is it that you can tell us about what happened to Christian McCaffrey so that we know that we're getting the right kind of information?
Well, I'll tell you what Kyle Shanahan told everyone after the game, which was that Christian McCaffrey injured his PCL, posterior cruciate ligament. You probably heard that before earlier this season when Puka Nacua injured his PCL. So, we hear about the ACL all the time. The PCL is the cruciate ligament that's posterior, so it sits behind the ACL, but also very important for knee stability. Basically, your femur or thigh bone relative to your shin bone. And when you have injury there, you feel a shifting or an instability, usually on the back side of the knee. The reason it matters compared to what we saw yesterday is I think people made an assumption that it was his Achilles. That was the immediate reaction, and everybody was watching the play where he went down and slid. But it turns out he probably was injured on a previous play. In fact, Kyle Shanahan referenced it because there was a play where he was running and it looked like he was going to get a breakaway. And he gets a shoestring tackle and he lands hard on the front of his knee. So one of the primary causes for a PCL injury is a direct blow on the front of the knee because it pushes the shin posterior relative to the thigh bone, and that's how you injure it. And when you land in snow on that surface, it's not like snow where you're, tumbling in soft snow. It's like concrete.
Yeah.
So when you land, that's a very hard landing. He tried to come back in, and he knew right away something was wrong. And I think you saw him bobble a little bit, almost looked like he stumbled or like his leg gave out. That was his body just telling him like he couldn't go, and he gave himself up, and that was the end of him for the game. As far as return time for fantasy purposes, I would say make your plans as if you may not have him the rest of the year. How they move forward will likely depend on what the evaluation, they'll get imaging, they'll have further workup on him today. And then the grade of injury and his symptoms will dictate the recovery time. And then they'll make an evaluation in the context of the season as well.
The context Stephania is referring to is the fact that this team is now 5-7. They are now 2 games back of the Seahawks for first place in the NFC West. Probably not going to see a playoff team besides the division winner from the NFC West. So if Christian McCaffrey is good to go in 3 weeks, and I'm just totally making that up, and they're 3 games out of the playoffs, they probably might say, we're good. We got to be mindful of our 28-year-old running back who, although we have seen this bounce back year for older running backs, you have to be mindful of how much wear and tear you want to put on a guy's body. Are you more determined to get him right for the start of 2025? This one sucks. There's no two ways about it. This is the player who was the face of fantasy football this season. He was the consensus first overall pick. This was the player who last year broke basically every single model. You thought you had reached your highest projection for Christian McCaffrey, and then he went out and did it even more in a season in which last year he averaged a career low in receptions per game. Christian McCaffrey was that dominant last season. And what sucks about this, on top of everything that has already been said and that we can all imagine sucks for a guy who missed the first 10 weeks of the season, comes back, is that he was finally starting to look like himself. He had 2 runs last night of at least 18 yards, his 2 longest runs of the night. And by the way, the play in which Taylor Rapp, the Bills safety, just gets a fingertip on him. If he doesn't, Christian McCaffrey house calls that baby. It's a 55-yard touchdown run. We are all sitting here saying, man, that wait was worth it. We know what the next man up in that backfield looks like. It's probably going to be Jordan Mason first. I do think because of how well Isaac Guerendo has played, he will see a bigger role than where Jordan Mason was. But for Week 14, you better expect Jordan Mason to be somewhere inside our top 25 of running backs. And until Christian McCaffrey returns, that's likely to be the case. But there's no two ways about it. It sucks in every single way. This is the risk you run in draft and playing fantasy football, right? Your star player. This is not something that is independent to Christian McCaffrey. It could have happened to anybody. It absolutely stinks. It seems like every year the player who goes #1 overall in terms of consensus ranks faces some sort of adversity. It has been a string of incredibly bad luck, but Christian McCaffrey's season may be over.
Yeah.
I think that was the worst part. What Field said is that, there was this question of, is he the same guy? And here he was. He'd missed so much time dealing with the lower extremity injury as a running back. It takes a little bit. And Shanahan had even addressed that earlier in the week. Like, it takes a while. You don't expect him to come out and be exactly where he left off. But he was starting to show signs of it, tripped up by, it's a game of inches, right? Because if that tackle isn't made, we're having a different conversation. And I think the other thing in terms of the context that's important is it's not just the PCL injury and how he is doing from that injury relative to the rest of the season. It's the fact that he was coming off something that cost him over half the season. And so you're looking at all of that together and saying and evaluating what you want to do going forward. That being said, for an athlete who's as competitive, and Christian McCaffrey is a different cat. I mean, his work ethic and his intensity is really on a different level. Sometimes they need to have the experience of going back on the field and knowing that they were good before they go into a long off season. So that's why I think the door remains open until we have more information.
Which will be great, obviously. So with that in mind, certainly don't drop Christian McCaffrey as we get into waivers tomorrow night, unless we get information before, tomorrow night when you go to bed that he's going to be out for the year. But it sucks in every way, shape, or form. Last thing for me, silver lining is just imagine how we talked about some of the guys coming into this season who are similar tier running backs. Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley. Saquon probably even a better example. Kind of down coming into this year because of a down season with some injuries last year in New York. The guy's the best player in fantasy football right now. That could be that Christian McCaffrey could be the 8th pick in the draft next year because of some scar tissue from this past year, and he might be the best player in fantasy football. He is still that talented of a guy, Daniel. Unfortunately, though, That was not the only injury from the week that was.
Yeah, and we're not going to have time to dive into every single one of them. I do want to ask you, though, about CeeDee Lamb, Stephania, because that was a weird one. It felt like when we were watching games on Thanksgiving, CeeDee Lamb just sat out the fourth quarter, it seemed like.
He did. He did end up aggravating the AC sprain that he had suffered previously in his right shoulder. We talk about this kind of injury as you get taken to the ground or hit hard, and you can then aggravate that injury. It makes it tough for a receiver to be able to get your arm overhead. If you're having so much pain, you can't elevate your arm. You're not going to be able to function very well. Jerry Jones did tell everyone that he thought that, and
Speaking of Twitter doctors,
he does speak for the players and the injury news most often. But basically, the fact that they had the mini bye built in, because we're coming off, they played on Thanksgiving, they don't play again until Monday night. I think the expectation is CeeDee Lamb will be available. CeeDee Lamb has made the expectation known that he will be available.
I'm going to hope that happens for us and all the fantasy managers.
Yep.
Two other injuries. We're not going to have time. We'll dive in a little bit more, but obviously we saw Trevor Lawrence leave the game, and it was a very scary injury. We'll get more injury update on that hopefully later on this week.
Concussion.
And then also Taysom Hill was carted off the field, which
The
is
injury
another
doesn't
one.
look good. Yep.
Yeah,
It's
that did not
obviously
look
been
great.
remarkable for the Saints. It's a huge loss for a team that really has no margin for error right now. You're talking about Marquez Valdez-Scantling playing a really prominent role for a team. It's going to be the Alvin Kamara, MVS. I mean, just insert Dante Pettis. It's guys, Kevin Wilson, wide receivers from off the scrap heap now.
It's like one of those you need to check your roster, you're scrolling through, who's this name? Yeah.
Brutal year for them.
That's not great. Well, we'll dive into a little bit more when we have more updates on the rest of the injuries here from Week 13. But let's dive into our Week 13 takeaways. Let's get a little positivity going here on this.
Please.
Throw 'em, baby.
Hey, let me ask you this question. Stephania, quick earmuffs. Who has more receiving touchdowns on the year? Deebo Samuel, Jared Goff, Bo Nix, or Josh Allen?
Is it a tie?
It's a tie. They all have one, and three of them are quarterbacks. Josh Allen threw a touchdown to Amari Cooper, who gave it back to him, which gave him a touchdown on his own pass.
This is the fantasy play of the year, Daniel. I'm sure by now everybody has already seen it, but if you missed it somehow, you just want to kind of keep up with how this play works, the mechanics of it from a box score scoring. So Josh Allen, obviously, throws the football to Amari Cooper. This ball is thrown to basically the left sideline. Cooper is kind of bared down on by two separate 49ers defensive backs. He sees Allen beelining it towards him and realizes Josh is kind of looking for the ball. Cooper makes a heads-up, albeit risky play, of laddering the football. I mean, it's snowing like crazy.
He was bobbling it to begin with.
Yes, he was.
Cooper's kind of like, all right, you take it, hot potato. Josh grabs it. Josh not only takes the football, handles it securely, but then it's like, wait, I might have a path to the end zone if I go Superman and dives from the 4-yard line, hand football on the pylon, touchdown. He becomes just the fourth player in league history to both throw and receive a touchdown on the same play. So again, to keep up with this, the way it's scored is as such. No matter how many yards the play results in, Josh gets all of the passing yards on the play because he is the initial thrower of the football. Amari Cooper gets the catch. Josh does not get the catch. Josh gets the yards, as in receiving yards, for however many yards he runs for after the ball's back in his hands. Think of end of game, pitchy, woo-woo situations. Where you see guys trying to make something out of nothing. Jalen Waddle had this happen a few weeks ago, where he went backwards for 20 yards at the end of the game. So he lost 20 receiving yards, did not get the extra catch because he was not the first person to receive the football. I know it's complicated. There are people that are saying this is wild. There are others who are saying, this is awesome. I have Josh Allen on my
Josh
team.
Allen said it was awesome.
That was my favorite thing was that at the end of in the post-game interview, and Melissa Stark is telling him that Chris Collinsworth is talking about how everybody's going nuts from their fantasy teams, and they're starting him in fantasy, and Josh Allen is like, I did too. And we were like, we love you, Josh Allen, because not only do you deliver fantasy points for us, you play fantasy football and you start yourself.
Of course he starts himself.
That's great.
Can you blame him? He
No,
has
I
been
can't.
amongst the best players in fantasy once again this season. If I told you Josh had just 166 total yards last night, you know what? Make that 173 total yards last night. You'd say, probably a pretty quiet day at the office. Oh no, Josh Allen turned it into 28.42 fantasy points amongst the highest scoring players at any position in Week 13. And by the way, one more note here. Josh Allen is now the first quarterback in NFL history with a passing, rushing, and receiving touchdown in the same game, albeit one of those passing touchdowns also was the receiving touchdown, but Josh was incredible last night. The Bills are wagging they are now 10-2 after winning 35-10. They were great. The Bills have now won the AFC East. Congratulations to them, the first team to clinch their division this season.
Yeah, good for them.
Yep.
I feel like I am a good, I'm a good fantasy football participant right now, because despite the great pain I suffered watching that game last night, I was able to look at the bright side of it, which is all the fantasy goodness that came out of it on the Buffalo Bills side, and appreciating that the quarterback of the winning team plays fantasy football. It really was. That was a really awesome thing.
It made it even better, honestly, that he was draped, like the whole snow aspect of that game. It was just like,
awesome.
It was very much like this volatile situation, and I think that snow games, in spite of the fact that we just talked about with the injury, they're just so much fun to watch. Watching guys slide around, watching guys, like you can tell that they're absolutely impacted by the elements.
Making snow angels in celebration.
Oh, it's so great. It's so great. I just love it.
Only one team was doing that.
It feels like it takes us back to being kids playing football.
Kids playing backyard football.
That's what it's like.
Well said.
It's so great. All right, let's dive into a handful of other takeaways like we usually do. Field, your Week 13 takeaway is?
Let's go back to Thursday night, Thanksgiving. If anybody can remember, if they stayed up for that game, if they survived the tryptophan, you watched a game in which you think if you saw the offensive numbers, the Dolphins won. They did not. They actually lost by 13 points against the Green Bay Packers. But this Dolphins offense found its way. Now let's talk about the various components here, as Tua was brilliant, and I'll talk about him in just a moment here. But Tyreek Hill actually makes his way over 20 fantasy points. And what do we tell you guys often? It's not how, it's how many. So who cares if Tyreek Hill got 8 fantasy points on a play in which the ball wasn't even intended for him, but it happened to be tipped by his own teammate and then just happens to fall right into Tyreek Hill's hands, who's in the end zone. So Tyreek Hill was very quiet in the first half. 2 catches for 4 yards, ends up with six catches for 83 yards and a touchdown. But I think the most notable part of this is that Jonnu Smith once again balls out.
Yep.
And we use this term a lot during the season, especially early on in the year. If you get a good waiver wire pickup, you say to yourself, is Jordan Mason a league winner? He might prove to be if Christian McCaffrey is out again and you've had him for the entirety of the season and he plays well down the stretch. Jonnu Smith may have actually entered that conversation. And sometimes we do that. We use that label too soon. This one might be appropriately timed, as Jonnu goes for 10 catches on 11 targets. Again, that other one was a near touchdown for 113 yards. If we could talk about whether this is sustainable or not, I think we've gotten past that point, guys. Like, if you're playing Jonnu Smith right now, you're doing so with a crap ton of confidence. He is a top 5 fantasy tight end, and he might be the #1 pass catcher amongst tight ends and wide receivers in this offense. He was awesome again on Thursday night.
It's crazy to think that that's a statement that you just made. He is the #1 pass catcher on an offense with both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, but he's had at least 10 targets in each of the last 3 games. He's had over 20 fantasy points in each of the last 3 games. He's doing what I expected Tyreek Hill to be doing from a production standpoint.
He's awesome.
But instead, it's all Jonnu Smith.
Yeah, so the Dolphins, they have a real way about them, and they're not doing it across the board, but Mike McDaniel has really talent maximized, right? Jonnu Smith is having the best season of his career in this offense. Devon Achane found the end zone as well, so he ends up with 8 catches, 56
His passing game work is so great.
It's ridiculous. So again, those 2 guys having a bigger role has led to a reduced role for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle compared to prior seasons. Waddle ends up with over 10 fantasy points. He scores a 2-point conversion, but not a monster day. 2 of them, just give them the flowers. I thought that the part that irked me about Thursday night, this team obviously loses. They're 30-17, and it was not, this was a very, very impressive performance by the Packers. One of the questions coming into the game was, hey, can Tua do it in the cold? We asked that same question on this very show. I had him outside my top 15 quarterbacks going into the week. The guy played great. 365 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. He now has 9 passing touchdowns and no picks in his last 3 games.
That's great.
Tua has been fantastic. He has been brilliant since coming back from injury. So while this team still has to prove that it can A, win in the cold, and B, beat good teams. They beat bad teams and they lose to good teams. That seems to be how it works under Mike McDaniel. Tua was awesome on Thursday night. And as we look ahead, the highest scoring quarterback in fantasy over the past 4 weeks, this may sound a little bit like dismissive of the accomplishment, but he feels like a top 10 to 12 option the rest of the season. And here's the reason why I say that. The thing that gives you hesitation about stamping Tua is higher than that. It's kind of like Joe Burrow, because Joe Burrow, he runs more than Tua, but not like this guy who runs for 50 yards a game. They play the Jets this upcoming weekend. And while the Jets have been a disappointment in so many ways, they have done a very, very good job of limiting opposing wide receivers still this season. But Tua has been awesome. I think he will be ranked probably around quarterback 12 for me this week. The schedule gets better after that. I'm a believer in what Tua is doing right now. He has really told a lot of people that, like, say whatever you want about the cold, the weather, my team, but I am not the problem right now.
There was some historical context as to why we thought Tua wouldn't do well, and he totally just proved us wrong. Like, that's just really what it came down to, is he just played much better than I had expected. I would love to see him, and this is just not going to happen. He just doesn't utilize his legs. I mean, he has, I think, 4 rushing yards over the last 3 games. As long as he's throwing multiple passing touchdowns a game, and with the passing volume that he's getting, and all of those, the dearth of pass catchers at his disposal.
Nice, well done.
That would be the
Oh, wait, it's the opposite.
inverse, yeah.
Dang it.
The glut.
Undearth, as well as the undearth, indearth.
Oh, I was just proud of him for using the word till.
Thank you, until Field, yeah.
Until
Thanks a lot, Field Yates.
we realized the context in which it was
What's
used.
the
But good
opposite
try,
of
good
dearth?
effort.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Stephania.
yeah. The glut. Field gave you a good
Glutton?
word. Glut.
All right.
Glut.
Not glutton, yeah.
Not
Glut?
glutton. Like not glutton for punishment, but glut. Like a.
I don't think that's a word. I think you guys are trolling me right now.
Honestly, I trust Princeton more than I do myself. And if she,
That's right. If she went along with it, then
I'm
you know
going
that
with
we're
it,
good.
yeah.
Well, I want to mention really quickly, I mean, on the other side of this game, Josh Jacobs. I feel like he is just peaking at the right time for fantasy managers. I mean, you look at what he did this week, 19 carries. Again, just a ton of volume. 43 yards, wasn't very efficient, but he did get in the end zone, and he had some great passing game work. 4 catches for 74 yards, 21.7 fantasy points. I'm going to read you his fantasy production since week 7, just to give you an idea in case you did not know what Josh Jacobs has done. 20.2 fantasy points, 25.5 fantasy points, 12.8. That was against a very tough Detroit Lions defense, and I think it was a rain game. A lot of weather in that one that unfortunately made it tough. And then 23.4, 28.6, and 21.7. 6 of his last 7 games, he's had at least 20 fantasy points.
He's been great.
This guy has been absolutely unbelievable when you look at them. He is responsible for 45% of the touches in this Green Bay offense since week 7. There is not one wide receiver or tight end that they are locking on to. They are just, everything is running through Josh Jacobs in this offense, and he is absolutely peaking at the right time for fantasy managers to not only make a playoff push, but to try to propel themselves to a championship.
Yeah, another one of those running backs who's thriving in, his second home.
You're right.
Yep. And by the way, I said this last week on the show, a big part of the reason why they felt motivated to sign Josh Jacobs after moving on from Aaron Jones, right? That was a very fascinating decision by Green Bay, is they felt like he was a player who, when it got later, not just in the game, but also in the season, and it got colder, kind of fit right in with what Green Bay wants to do. It was like mild conditions on Thursday night for what Green Bay could have in subsequent home games the rest of the way. Josh Jacobs has been a hand-in-glove fit there.
So good.
And Stephania, so has Bucky Irving in Tampa Bay.
Bucky Irving. Now, I asked you who was the leader in fantasy points by a running back coming into today's conversation with Monday night still to go, would you have picked Bucky Irving to be the guy?
Someone who would have.
Yeah.
Mike Clay, he started the week last week.
Oh, yeah. Oh, was it? I wasn't here for that show. Usually I'm here for the start of the week. I missed.
You were out spending time
Do we
with
have to
Mama
tell
Bell.
him that he was right about this?
No, we don't.
Okay.
Usually we don't do those board bets.
So everybody else can hear me brag about Bucky Irving's performance, but don't anybody tell Mike Clay. Out of 36 running back carries, Irving had 25 of them. And I think that matters because I think you're starting to see a shift in terms of Bucky Irving dominating the Tampa Bay backfield, and he's certainly earning it. 25 carries for 152 yards and a touchdown. That's his most rushing yards in his young career. 3 catches, too, for 3 receptions for 33 yards. A lot of threes there. What his total yards from scrimmage, best in his career. And unfortunately, he was on special teams playing, had a kick return, ended up injuring his hip in that. And although he finished out the game, he had that 43-yard run in the fourth quarter, you did see him limping quite a bit. Maybe you caught that video clip. I couldn't tell if it was a heating pad or ice pack wrapped around his hip and kind of limping into the tunnel. So something to watch for the week. But if he's healthy, I think he has earned his way to the top spot in the Tampa Bay backfield.
Absolutely. I mean, we had him inside our top 15, in part because he was taking on the Carolina Panthers, but this is what you expect, right? Yeah. When you have a running back go up against this defense, you want to see them perform the way that Bucky Irving did this week.
What a good player he is, man.
He's been awesome.
Very impressive. And, Rachaad White's still going to have a role to the point that he'll be...
Todd Bowles has made that clear.
Yes.
Like 1,000% made that clear that he's going to stick with that. The other thing, don't tell Mike Clay about Bucky Irving helping him win his start of the week prediction, but do tell him that Stephania's complaint about some of these players playing on special teams when we need them as their star position in fantasy. This is why we make that claim.
Thank you.
Well said. Yep.
By the way, in this game, really quickly, I can't believe, I mean, overtime, it went down to the wire. The Bucks barely be able to pull this one out. But did you see the catch that Adam Thielen made in this? It was unbelievable.
That's old man strength.
Yeah, I was going to say, nice to see the veteran for him to get that.
If you did not see it, make sure that you go check it out and see the play that Adam Thielen made. You can find it on social media. It was unbelievable, a one-handed catch.
I said this last week, and I think it's worth restating. There are a lot of bad teams in the NFL right now. And I think that what I would have my eyes on, if I were a fan of one of these bad teams, and you know you are. You've got 3 or fewer wins this season, you're bad, okay? What I would be wondering is, when I watch my team play, do they look like they're disciplined? Do they play hard? Are they better this week than they were last week? Do they handle situations well? All of those things would be things that I would be looking at. Not, listen, we all want to win the games. Or maybe you want to lose the games because you want a better draft
at this point.
But the bottom line is that, going 3-14 versus going 4-13 is not as consequential of a difference to me as all the factors that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Of all the really bad teams in the NFL right now, there's one that I know for certain is getting better, is disciplined, smart situationally, not mailing it in, improving. That's Carolina. It's going to take a little time. They got a lot of holes they got to fill. Bryce Young improving by the week. You have my attention, Carolina Panthers. I said it last week, and I feel stronger about it today. They're building something the right way right now in Carolina. They've had some misses along the way, but they're doing things the right way, and it's been nice to see some of that pay off over the past month or so.
Makes you happy, particularly for Bryce Young, too, who some people thought, what does the future hold for him? Where is he going to end up? Is he even going to be in Carolina? And to see him and see his smile as he's having some of this success, I mean, that really can be foundational for the entire team.
Yep. Yeah, they're playing with a fire in their belly that some of these other 3 and whatever teams are just not. So
we watch you all.
Yep,
we watch you all.
We do. All right, let's dive into the studs of the week here in Week 13. And how can you not start at the tight end position? I mean, this guy just continues to dominate over and over and over again. Brock Bowers is just unbelievable. I don't even know what's left to say. I want to put out a little bit of data here. Last year, we were just fawning over how good Sam Laporta was as a rookie. If you guys remember, the unbelievable rookie season that Sam Laporta had. He had 7 games over 15 fantasy points. Brock Bowers has 7 games over 15 fantasy points with 5 games left to play in the season.
Not only that, so, one of the things that, that Twitter will jump down your throat on is when you say, for example, Saquon Barkley is currently on pace to break the NFL single-season rushing record. He has 1 more game than Eric Dickerson had. I understand that. So Eric Dickerson, if Saquon beats him by 8 yards, Dickerson's season, more impressive. Brock Bowers is now 3 catches away from setting the single-season rookie tight end reception record.
Unbelievable.
With 5 games to play. He might do that on the first drive of their next game. This guy is the truth, the Bowers that be, the ultimate super Bowers, whatever you want to call him. This guy is a monster. There is no covering him whatsoever. Teams know it's going to either Brock Bowers or Jacoby Myers, and it's not slowing either one of them.
Doesn't matter. And the thing is that he helps his quarterback out too. You just watch him play. He comes back for the ball. He's making catches that other people would drop. Yesterday, he gets a career high in receiving yards, basically his career being this season, 140 yards. 14 targets. We talked when we were bragging about tight ends how volume is king, but he's also getting some touchdowns. He gets another one yesterday, his 4th touchdown on the season, his second 100-yard game of the season. My goodness.
He's just unbelievable, honestly. If you've got Brock Bowers, and I said this before, we were all so bummed with the landing spot and how this was going to play out in fantasy. And
They already have a tight end.
Yep.
What's going to be the role for him? And
not a great quarterback situation. Like, this is one of those situations where the quarterback just has not mattered in the same way that it has for maybe some of the other wide receivers that we have, had some disappointment feelings.
I'm not even sure people played him in daily fantasy, but Aiden O'Connell sliced the Chiefs up.
did.
That was better than Patrick Mahomes on Friday.
I felt so bad for him at the end of that game. I felt so bad. Like,
It was not him.
Hold on.
It wasn't Aiden O'Connell. It wasn't.
That's what
That
I
was
mean.
not his fault.
It was not him.
Hold on for a second, people. Teams, and I'm addressing all of you. If you're playing the Chiefs and the game is close and you're either winning or you have a chance to win, I have some advice for you. And this is free. I'm not going to charge you on that.
That's nice. That's good.
It's a decent.
Got a high hourly
field.
rate.
Don't barf down your legs. Just do the very easy, simple things. Get the ball from the center to the quarterback and don't fumble it, okay? Or if you have a chip shot field goal, get the ball from the long snapper to the holder to the kicker and put the ball over the defense and through the uprights. I don't understand. The Chiefs have 9 lives when the game is on the line. It's unbelievable.
Crazy.
Listen, they're a great team. They're a deserving back-to-back champion. But it's like teams, all of a sudden the game is on the line and they decide to shrivel up. It's unfathomable to me.
Yeah.
So I'm laughing at a couple things. First of all, barf down your legs that's a new one for me.
Yeah.
It's usually
lot.
something.
That's the
It's usually
family
something else.
version of it.
No,
Yeah.
is that it?
So it
That's
is.
Okay, got it. Secondly, I heard that there was a claim by the Raiders that they heard there was a phantom whistle or something, or they heard a whistle.
possibility,
There was
yeah.
there's something going.
It looked like it was a false start.
Whatever it is.
Yes.
There's some kind of juju that the Chiefs have that impacts the people on the other side of the ball facing them. Because to your point, Aiden O'Connell looked like a guy who was not concerned that he was facing the Chiefs.
Yes.
Like, his performance was fantastic. So I know our shout out was really to Brock Bowers, but Aiden O'Connell deserves an assist or an honorable mention on that because I thought the way he played was outstanding.
It was awesome. Yep.
Totally agree.
Yep.
Let's talk about another quarterback that had himself a day. Russell Wilson.
Can't this one be simple?
He still has not thrown for 300 yards. Did you guys know that? He's thrown for 200 yards, and he's thrown for 400 yards. He's never had a 300-yard game this year.
Can we just play him
That was
against? Just like
insane.
my takeaway is like, if you're playing the Bengals, crank it up, baby.
Seriously.
Oh my gosh.
They-
I kept looking at the score thinking that could not be real
This is
for the
Bengals
Steelers
Steelers?
offense. For the Steelers offense.
And Russ was great. That's being a bit reductive, a bit simplifying
Still.
things. But this Bengals defense, I just don't. Listen, they had some attrition this offseason, and they've had some injuries, and they've had some guys who haven't played that well. I'm not denying any of those factors, but how do you go from like a pretty good defense to the worst in the NFL? They're awful.
Yeah.
Awful. So play everybody. Every person. Play that person's cousin when they're playing against the Bengals.
Bengals.
How bad they are.
I could not believe that the Steelers scored this many points. It was a very fun game just to be able to watch with all the things that were going on in this one. But yeah, shout out to Russ if you did start him, getting over 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, 26.8 fantasy points. It was awesome. Another guy that was awesome, Lad McConkey.
So good.
Young lad.
Good at the game, man. Good at the game.
11 targets, 9 receptions, 117 yards. It's his third 100-yard receiving game out of his last 6 games.
Yeah.
And I realize that, that might be a big stretch, but like we're seeing a rookie start to kind of really put things together with his quarterback towards the second half of the season. He has looked fantastic so far. First game ever that he has had over, double-digit targets, at least 10 targets, because he has always been underneath that. So he's been doing a lot with the efficiency standpoint, but just love being able to see him
I
get
was
the
going
ball.
to say in the volume, most targets, most receptions of his young career.
Yep.
Previous high was 6 receptions. So it just, you feel like the trend is going in the right direction, that he is now going to be like Justin Herbert's like, I am looking for you all the time. He did have a knee injury late in the game, so kind of stay tuned for reports as to what's going on there.
We talk about this in fantasy, though. Like, a lot of times we're looking for who are those, like, rookie pass catchers that towards the second half of the season can start to turn some things on. Jaden Reed did it a little bit last year for the Packers. Amon-Ra St. Brown did it the year before. That's just 2 of a couple names that you could throw out there. Like, I love seeing what Lad's been able to put together recently.
100%. Yep.
All right, let's move into another team here rather than just one player. How about the Bears pass catchers?
Yeah, I'm sure, Daniel, you were a little bit sweating this one out on Thursday.
I felt great that the Lions were not the only team to squeak out a very winnable game. Thank you, Kansas City Chiefs, for also doing that against the Raiders. But
yeah, I mean, they played 2 halves for a reason, is what Bears fans were saying, because in the first half it was a disaster. It was just a pitiful performance from the Bears. And in the second half, they dug themselves out of it, man. A huge credit to Chicago, because they could have easily mailed that game in. Heck, their coach got fired the next day because of some of the end-of-game foibles. Say this about the Bears, though, is that, I was talking about the Panthers and the signs that they are showing. For the Bears, the most important thing to figure out this year was just how good Caleb Williams is. Turns out pretty darn good, huh? Mm-hmm. Completed just over 50% of his passes, but you got to break that down from first to second half. Guy was throwing some seeds in the second half, and he's getting his 2 wide receivers prominently involved. Shout out to Daniel Dopp. Start of the week was DJ Moore. 16 targets for DJ. 16. So one thing that we have seen under new head coach, not just offensive coordinator and play caller, for
Thomas Brown.
Oh, Thomas Brown. I didn't say his name. Sorry. Thomas Brown for the Bears is that it's going to be 2 guys. It's going to be DJ Moore. It's going to be Keenan Allen. Right. Rome Odunze is going to be a huge factor for this team long term. He had just a couple of catches this past week. It is going to be the Keenan Allen, DJ Moore show. I should have said that the other way around. DJ Moore and then Keenan Allen. But it looks really good right now.
Last week, Keenan Allen had 15 targets. This week, DJ Moore had 16 targets. It feels like, hey, where's the defense going to give Caleb some opportunities to be able to take advantage of a few things? Things are definitely trending up for the Chicago Bears.
Yep. And
how difficult it was.
Their schedule is really tough down the stretch in real life, but Mike has constantly reminded us pretty good for wide receivers. And this team, who knows? I don't like to kick people on the way out, obviously. It's just not professional. It just doesn't feel right. But it does seem like this team was ready for change at head coach. And perhaps you get a spirited performance. We have seen this time and again. Interim head coaches, they find a way to fuel the fire a bit. Darren Rizzi for the Saints is a good example here this season already. So perhaps the Bears come out, play well this upcoming week in what is yet another difficult game for them.
Yeah, I don't want this at all to sound like it's piling on, because I'm very grateful as a Lions fan. But it is unfathomable to have whatever it was, 33 seconds on the clock with a timeout, and there's felt like no situational awareness in that situation at all as the head coach to be able to say, all right, let's make sure that my rookie quarterback knows what he needs to do here for the end of this game in order to pull this one out. So hopefully better days are going to continue to be ahead for the Chicago Bears, and we love what we've seen so far under Thomas Brown. Stephania, I love what I've seen, and if our old friend Matthew Berry was here, he'd go on a 10-minute diatribe on how Jaden Daniels has been playing. But recently, Jaden Daniels has gotten back to utilizing his legs. It feels like he's kind of gotten over some of that rib stuff that he was dealing with earlier in the season.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It feels like he's gotten healthier while he's been playing, right? Sometimes players come back from an injury. They're back on the field. They want to be there. They're medically cleared to be there, but they still aren't quite themselves. They're still dealing with some lingering soreness or stiffness or trying to protect themselves, perhaps, as the case with Jaden Daniels. And even as there was a question about it, and I think Dan Quinn responded, there's no injury. He's not hurt. And whether that kind of flipped a switch or Jaden Daniels just started getting more comfortable again, he now looks like himself. If it weren't for the Josh Allen miracle and the snow performance last night, Jaden Daniels would be the #1 quarterback in your fantasy in the fantasy world with 27.64 fantasy points.
Back-to-back games over 27.5 fantasy points. He has 9 games over 19.5 fantasy points. That little slump that he took earlier this year, in part because of the rib injury that he had, feels like we've kind of come out to the other side of that one, Field.
And he's finding Terry McLaurin.
He is. Yeah, McLaurin, who had another monster.
Monster game. And that I think that connection is really important for Jaden Daniels' success.
8 for 73 and 2 touchdowns from McLaurin. Just a monster career year for him. I was talking about all those things you're looking for in a young team that's got talent issues. Carolina is showing them. Tennessee is not. So let's get it together, guys. Let's see a little bit more professionalism in the first quarter instead of a 21-point disaster. Value the football, be situationally smart. Tennessee was a joke yesterday. So that's not to take away from Jaden. I don't mean to get off the target here, but just I wanted to make sure that I sort of closed the loop on that Carolina thought, because there is sort of the counterpunch to what Carolina is doing in a positive way.
It felt like this was everything that we wanted, because not only did Jaden Daniels utilize his legs, find the end zone with his legs, which, by the way, he may be running just a little bit more, knowing that Austin Eckler is on IR. It's obviously Brian Robinson Jr. and I just blanked on.
Jeremy McNichols.
Jeremy
On the backfield there. But being able to find Terry McLaurin so often was fantastic. I would love to, I just want to throw this out there, and I don't want to be negative about this. But Terry McLaurin is so good in so many stats outside of targets. He's wide receiver 33 in targets this year. That's one of the things that he's been very efficient, that like Jaden Daniels has been able to find him a lot of times in the painted area. He scored, I think, 9 touchdowns this year. So you love to see that. But I'm going to hope that continues to be able to get even stronger between those two.
We're going to miss them. They're on a bye this week. We're going to miss you. We have 6 teams on a bye.
Yeah.
I'm again.
Mad at you, NFL.
Yeah, don't love that.
Or 2.
Don't love that.
All right, last one.
All right, let's talk about Bijan Robinson. What do you even have to say about Bijan Robinson
I'll
at this
tell you
point?
what to say. This is important. Most touches in a game for Bijan. 32 yesterday.
Unbelievable.
So, let this guy cook. Turns out when you do so, you get 25.5 fantasy points. There was another, what I don't get is like, there was another short yardage situation yesterday.
Oh,
it was like Algier. Yank him out, get Bijan in. Okay, now we convert. So Bijan's an absolute star. I love watching this guy. If we were to do it all over again, it's Saquon at the very top of fantasy drafts, but Bijan somewhere in that first 3 picks, probably at worst. He has been brilliant.
There's something about his footwork around the end zone too. Like the way he gets in, he's very aware of those end zone margins. And I think if you watch him play, like a couple of touchdowns he's brought for you have been because of that. It's really, I just love watching him.
Playing this one out here, it's probably Saquon, Jamar Chase, and then Bijan, Derrick Henry vying for that next spot would be my guess if we're doing a redraft.
Oh, shoot.
We don't have to go down that
We'll
path.
talk about another guy that was at the top of this a little bit later in the show that was disappointing. But yeah, he's been absolutely unbelievable. Top 10 running back in 6 of the last 7 games.
Yeah, second only to Bucky Irving this week.
Yeah.
I mean, anytime you can be second to Bucky Irving, you still feel like you had a pretty good day.
Yep.
All right, let's dive into a couple of quick shout-outs. I'm going to start this one off, if you don't mind, with Rico Dowdle.
What?
Had himself a career day. 22 carries.
I thought Dallas had no run game.
Yards. Dude, we said CeeDee Lamb is the only one you feel good starting. Well, Rico Dowdle, you felt good if you had to start him this week. 21.3 fantasy points, 3 targets, and 3 receptions as well in this one. And he took advantage of a soft Giants defense. You love to see that. He takes on 2 teams that have just been giving up a boatload of points to running backs. And that's the Cincinnati Bengals and the Carolina Panthers coming up next.
Derrick Henry gets the Giants in Week 15 after his bye next week.
Ooh, that's
Yeah.
I'm really excited about that. All right, Stephania, where are you going with your shout-out?
How about Najee Harris? I mean, I feel like he's the one that people are like, I think it's going to be Jalen Warren. I really think it's going to be Jalen Warren. Well, Najee Harris would like a word. He didn't have such a great week in Week 12, but he comes back in Week 13 to put up over 100 yards. It's the first time since Week 8 that he has over 100 yards of scrimmage total as a runner and a receiver. Caught 6 catches on 6 targets for 54 yards. Carried the ball 16 times. I mean, this is a lot of work for Najee Harris, which to me signifies trust. We talked about Bucky Irving. We talked about Bijan Robinson. Guess who came in 3rd place so far this week? Najee Harris.
Wow.
Nico Collins balled out last night, guys, or yesterday, I should say. And the Texans didn't really, their offense continues to struggle, but Nico Collins and Joe Mixon get the job done. And Nico surpasses 100 receiving yards for the first time since his return back from that injury.
We like that.
And actually the 3rd time if you count the touchdowns that were yanked away from him on penalties, which were legitimate penalties, but penalties that in some ways didn't really impact the outcome of that specific play. So Nico continues to shine, nearly 20 fantasy points, but Texans, let's get it going offensively. You're not going to do damage in the playoffs if you don't play better on offense, Daniel.
Yeah, shout out to Nico Collins, though. How about another wide receiver? T. Higgins just keeps smashing. After the bye, coming into this one, had 17.9 fantasy points, 10 targets. He's had double-digit targets for the 2nd consecutive game. Found the end zone again for the 3rd time, 3rd straight game since Week 4. He's had at least a 27% target share. 27%!
Crazy.
Which is unbelievable. He's averaging 18.4 fantasy points per game since that span, and it's very easy to see why. Since he's been healthy, he has been crushing it. I feel bad saying this, but like Cincinnati Bengals fans, enjoy it while you can.
I was going to say, he's a #1 wide receiver anywhere else.
And he's going to go somewhere else this offseason. So enjoy what you have here now while you have it, because he's just been awesome lately.
Think of him in the same vein as Christian Wilkins, Xavier McKinney, like true blue free agents who like are leaving because of circumstances. Sometimes when guys reach free agency, it's like, what's like the red flag here? Nope, that's not T. Higgins. He's going to get himself a bag this offseason.
Yes, he will.
Good for him. Well, you know who else was impressive in the receiver department is Mike Evans. If you had concerns about a 31-year-old wide receiver coming back from a hamstring injury, have them no more. This is his first 100-yard receiving game of the season. He came close in week 4 against Philly when he had 94 yards, but this week he also tied his number of targets, which he hit the high mark also against the Philadelphia Eagles back in week 4. So what I'm telling you basically is that you got the Mike Evans of week 4 in week 13. 12 targets, 8 catches for 118 yards and a touchdown. We always think of him around the red zone, but I don't think we think of him as that kind of volume of yardage that much. But
You love it. Love to see it.
Speaking of things you'd like to see, Anthony Richardson doing it again, guys.
Yes.
So Richardson finding his swagger a little bit.
Happy.
Anthony Richardson, who helps the Colts get a huge win. They go for 2 with just 12 seconds left. And they beat the Patriots 25-24. And Richardson now over 20 fantasy points for the 3rd time this season. I know that sounds like kind of ho-hum given the expectations that I had for him coming into the season. I will just say this. We're starting to see the version of Anthony Richardson that we hoped for all offseason. Completes only 50% of his passes, and we can do this for every quarterback. But Colts, receivers, catch the ball when it's thrown right to you.
some of the drops were ridiculous. Ridiculous. You really need to look at that stat is so important because if you look in isolation at what his completion percentage was, you were not watching the game.
Yep.
That was
importantly for Anthony
support.
Richardson, he does have 2 passing touchdowns plus 9 rushes for 48 yards and a score. Again, guys, it's going to end up being a bad call still, but if we get this version of Anthony Richardson coming out of their bye, weeks 15, 16, 17, and 18, then imagine the conversation going into next season. We could very credibly have Anthony Richardson as a potential top 10 quarterback because of the weekly upside.
Feels like reports of his demise were greatly exaggerated.
I don't feel like totally great being like, never wrong, just early,
I'll tell you what, though. Since he has come back and played, it's that rushing volume. I mean,
it's using how he should be used.
Exactly. It's like this is part of what you have when you have a 6'4", 240-pound quarterback. Use him this way. That's
that
part of his
carry
game.
at the goal line was the proof, right? He can run right through you.
By the way, he threw a passing touchdown to a running back. Jonathan Taylor caught a pass, and then that was awesome.
Crazy.
We had just been talking about that on the morning show, that we were missing that. We were worried about Jonathan Taylor, so nice way for Anthony Richardson to get him involved
really great.
too. Yep.
All right, let's dive into a couple of duds here really quickly.
A reminder of the weekly duds. Is this something, or is this just hey, it happens, it sucks, move on?
Justin Herbert unfortunately fell short in Atlanta. Did not have really any rushing in this one. 5 carries for 1 yard, but there was not a lot of rushing volume. We've seen him run quite a bit more recently.
Yeah, weird game too. They didn't really
weird
need it.
game.
It was a tough one.
Because Kirk Cousins kept throwing the ball back to them, including
4
a pick
interceptions
6.
by Kirk Cousins. That was so weird. I don't think that this is going to change much, and I'll tell you why. Although he is taking on Kansas City in Arrowhead, which is going to be tough. Sunday Night Football.
I love that ding.
Even with this dud, I still think he's going to be a top 12 quarterback field because this week on bye, you have Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, C.J. Stroud, Drake May, and Anthony Richardson. That's a boatload of startable quarterbacks that you're going to be without here in Week 14. So I think because of that, even with this down game against Atlanta, it still feels like we're going to be in a good spot with Justin Herbert.
On top of that, the Chiefs defense, guys, look at them the past few weeks. Bryce Young, Aiden O'Connell, Josh Allen 3 weeks ago, which Josh doing his thing is Josh, right? But those other 2 guys, if they've had their way with the Chiefs defense, you might feel pretty good about Herbo on Sunday night.
How do you feel about another quarterback here? I mean, in spite of the fact that we already talked about a bunch of Bucs that did some really great things, Field, Baker Mayfield didn't really do the same as Mike Evans or Bucky Irving.
I don't have the energy inside me right now to dunk on Baker Mayfield, who has been so good this season, right? One bad day at the office against a team that I've been giving credit to, Carolina, they didn't need a whole lot more from Baker Mayfield. They kind of felt like the path forward was just to run the football a ton. By the way, Saquon Barkley gets those Panthers next week.
Oh, I love that.
So Baker, down day, it stinks, but you've gotten so much out of him that I can't feel too bad about it. He'll still be a highly ranked quarterback for me next week.
Stephania, you mentioned the rushing volume earlier in the show. Bucs had 236 rushing yards. Baker threw for 235 passing yards. Yeah. This was one of the games where it felt like this wasn't Baker not being good. This was what's going to work against Carolina? Running the football with our running backs.
Yeah, and, again, more props to Bucky Irving
Exactly.
for cementing his status in that backfield.
You know, speaking of, if we were to redraft right now,
Listen.
Breece Hall was the third running back off the board, and I just don't know what to make of him.
Well,
I don't know what to make of the Jets offense in
I
general.
think there's a lot going on here because there's a few things that can be true, which is the Jets' offense is a disaster. But also, Breece Hall came into this game with a knee injury. He struggled. It was not his best game. Only had 12 carries for 60 yards. Did have a 2-point conversion. He fumbled the ball twice. One of them he turned over. It was, again,
no
bad.
receiving game work. That's part of what he does so well, too.
And he only targeted once, right? And didn't catch it. So it was. I think it was a
conversion that allowed him to get to 6 fantasy points, even with that fumble.
Oh, thank goodness.
Yeah,
for
that's what.
two-point conversion.
That's it. That's all you got.
So this is an interesting one. I was thinking about the parallel, and I think it's Tyreek Hill, but Tyreek maybe had fallen further that this may not be perfect. But like with Breece, this, I think, will still be one of those where it's like, are you or are you not starting him? You probably are. In every league that I have Breece Hall, I will be starting him this upcoming week. It doesn't, but like, it's just not fun.
No.
It's not fun.
100%.
But, you know, 2 touchdowns the last time we saw him. Felt like 2 fantasy points yesterday, ended up being 6. So you got to kind of ride the wave. This Jets team, you know, what kind of effort do they give the rest of the way? I actually thought they looked okay coming out of the gates yesterday, and then they were undone by just
like spiraled down so badly. So
3-yard pick 6 by Leonard Williams. I mean, yeah, the Jets.
That was unbelievable.
Here's their schedule coming up.
That should have been a shout out, just for what it's. I'm sorry not to interrupt you, but Leonard Williams deserves a shout out for that.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah,
90-yard like interception touchdown.
Longest one by a
300.
defensive lineman ever.
Awesome.
I know it was fun. Not gonna lie. But here's the Jets schedule: face Miami next, at Miami, at Jacksonville. Then they have the Rams at home. Then they're at Buffalo. Then they host Miami.
Yeah.
So it's like there's a couple in there where you're like, oh, Breece could have a really good day. Don't love the Buffalo matchup, but you know, he's the one bright spot in their offense, I think.
Devontae had a good day yesterday, but it was a quiet day for Garrett Wilson yesterday. You know, Rodgers, I thought, actually moved around well yesterday. Just wasn't throwing the ball accurately.
One tried, you know, he had one kind of semi-scamper.
Yeah. But just a quirky, weird day, kind of emblematic of the Jets' season as they just, you know, continually find ways to disappoint. So, Aaron, but Breece Hall, again, I will say this now, like, especially with the 16th on a bye, he will be inside my top 15 running backs this week.
Yeah, I agree with you, just given the state of the position in Week 14. Aaron Jones, unfortunately, Stephania, we've been so
this
pumped
one
for him.
makes me sad because this is not characteristic of Aaron Jones to have poor ball control. So he fumbled last week. Then he had 2 fumbles this week, and that ended up, you know, putting him on the bench for a while. At the end of the game, he catches a pass in the end zone. He has a receiving touchdown, which for me is more important for his morale than what it did for your fantasy roster because you only got 9.8 fantasy points out of him. 5 carries, 22 yards. You lost the points on the 2 fumbles. And then he had 4 targets, 3 catches. One of those was that touchdown pass.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, thank goodness for that touchdown catch because without that, it would have been even more abysmal than what it was.
I wouldn't be stunned if we saw a little more of, and I'll draw the parallel to Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary, is I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a bit more of Cam Akers this week at least. You know, we saw this when the Giants played on Thanksgiving. If you were watching the game, you may have noticed that each of the first 3 drives, Devin Singletary started the game for them. Didn't have great results, and Tyrone Tracy ended up finding the end zone, scoring 14.5 fantasy points. But wouldn't stun me if we see a bit more of Cam Akers this week. Just, you know, there's an accountability in Aaron Jones. 2 fumbles these past, you know, this week, and hasn't been as dominant of late as he was to begin the season.
It's really interesting. Remember, we started the season, we thought Ty Chandler was going to be, and he's just become nothing, like invisible. Cam Akers, obviously when they signed him, Kevin O'Connell had a lot of praise for Cam Akers. He had liked him when he was with the team before, so he was familiar with him. But he easily vaulted into that second spot and now might end up getting a little bit more work with Aaron Jones' struggles of late.
Yep.
I'm still going to have Aaron Jones ranked as a starter this week, again, in part because of the 6 teams on a bye that we talked about. So just doing is it impacting the way that we're approaching him? Not yet for Aaron Jones. He's still going to be a starter for me. But I am interested to see how much of a workload split we're potentially going to have with Cam Akers moving forward. Let's talk about Cooper Kupp. I mean, this just felt like one of those, like, hey, this is just like a weird
It's like, stop. Don't worry, please.
Here's what I'm more concerned, more focused on. Cooper Kupp needed 3 catches yesterday to set the record for the most receptions through 100 games in NFL history.
No.
He got 3.
Oh,
That's all he needed.
Yeah.
He needed 3, he got 3.
Great.
All right,
Love
so
that.
he surpassed, I believe it was Keenan Allen, who previously had the record. So 2 guys, 2 stars
That's pretty good.
who deserve any kind of accolades and praise that they get. So Cooper Kupp yesterday, what are you going to do? I mean, this was a weird game. If you watched this game, a lot of weird stuff in this game, actually. So the Rams, through like the first 20 minutes of game action, ran 4 plays. The Saints ground controlled it early. Kyron Williams was not even on the field early in the game. You're like,
Yeah,
what's
that
going
was
on here.
That was really strange. Wondered what.
Remember, Kyron's been having
Yeah.
some fumbling issues,
Yeah.
but ends up punching it in, gets a touchdown, has a great late run to seal the game. I'm a sucker for these post-game locker room videos,
Mm-hmm.
and Sean McVay had Kyron Williams fired up after that game. Those two, like, you can tell that bond runs deep, that, well, you got to hold on to the football. Sean McVay wants Kyron Williams to be the focal point. Like, he desperately wants him to be the blood vessel of that running game, and you can tell that while at least my read was, got to limit you early, a little bit of Blake early, but it's going to be you down the stretch. So just a weird night for the Rams offense, other than Puka Nacua, who just found the end zone again because of what he does.
Well, it was so strange, too, because Stafford only threw, he had 14 completions.
Yeah.
14. So when you're thinking
Low-scoring
about
game.
the kind of volume that these wide receivers are going to get, you basically needed to get in the end zone like Puka did, 5 for 56 and a touchdown.
Demarcus Robinson continues to be a thing where
my God.
these are. We need to
week
talk
for
about
him,
this. And maybe we can talk about this tomorrow because I need to have somebody help me when you're throwing up in the air like the dart of who is going to be the guy when I need that one player in my flex spot who's going to do something. And every week I say, nope. That was a fluke. It's not going to be Demarcus Robinson again.
Different way to do that. So just
Grab a hat.
Grab a hat, yeah.
I love it.
Right there.
So good.
Yeah.
So
We
good.
don't need darts. We need a hat. Yeah.
We got one more guy that we got to talk about here, and I don't
This
have a
week,
lot that I'm
right?
going to say. It's
Yeah.
like Juwan Jennings. Well, I'll tell you what's actually interesting about this. Juwan Jennings had a tough game. Don't panic about that.
No, the
But
dud here is not him.
The idea that we're talking about Juwan Jennings over Deebo Samuel, I think
That's the
tells
dud.
us
That
That's
matters.
the one.
Guys,
we've made a full change.
what are we going to do here?
Did you watch the game?
Yeah.
What did you think about Debo's performance?
I thought he was great returning kicks, and that was about it.
Thank you. Okay.
Not great.
Because this is, whenever we talk about him this week, will be the 3rd straight week where I'm sitting here bemoaning, like, is Deebo still a starter anymore? And here we are. And I'm not sure the answer is yes.
Kind of doesn't feel like it.
Not getting elite volume, not finding the end zone. He has 1 receiving touchdown this season. Maybe if Christian McCaffrey, not if, when McCaffrey misses games, they'll say we got to get more out of Deebo as a runner. But it has been a tough go of it.
Does not look in sync with this
No,
quarterback
it's not.
either.
No,
I mean,
it's
it's not.
The gap will be.
not there.
I actually feel really good about Juwan Jennings going forward. This last night was a snow globe. Like, it's hard to throw the
that was tough.
football,
It was a tough
so largely. Who do they play this week?
I'm looking this up right
It's
now.
not in Buffalo. That's what I know.
I tried to stop thinking
can
about the
confirm.
49ers after
It's not in Buffalo this week. Right?
Let's
Guessing
see.
someone in the NFC West, whatever, whoever it is, they're playing
No,
someone.
they play the Bears.
Okay, the Bears in Chicago.
Yeah, they host the Bears,
great,
then they
okay.
host the Rams, and they're at Miami, host the Lions on Monday Night Football.
Yeah.
Oh boy, and then at the Cardinals.
Okay, well, the good news is you're not going to play a snow globe game going forward. All right, you just aren't. That's great news right there. So I feel good about Juwan Jennings going forward. I really, really, really do. I don't feel great about Deebo.
No.
I just don't.
I don't think I'm at a spot. I mean, outside of,
Maybe.
and again, maybe
Benching him, maybe.
Maybe because we got 6 teams on a bye that'll like propel him up a little higher.
It will.
But when we have the entirety of our roster back, once we get into Week 15 and we're talking about playoffs, has Deebo done enough to make you feel like, you know what? It's a win or go home situation. I'm going to definitely choose this guy.
I mean, he can have that game for sure, right? I mean,
course.
Tyreek Hill got you 20 on Thursday night, but Deebo, not a lineup block right now.
Doesn't feel great.
Nope. If you got a good team, he is not a lineup block.
I feel so bad saying this, but this is another one of those situations. It feels to me, and tell me if you disagree with this, similar to T. Higgins. Like, I thought Deebo was going to be gone at the end of this year, knowing that they signed Brandon Ayuk. They've obviously got Ricky Pearsall, who was a first rounder. They still got George Kittle, and so now it's like it seems like they're not going to have enough money. They're going to have to pay Brock Purdy. So is this potentially the end of a Deebo Samuel career? And
I want to remind people this. Head coaches and GMs make a lot of money. GMs make a lot of money not for the easy choices, but for the hard ones. And John Lynch has a lot of difficult decisions this offseason. They just do. And this was They've got a ton of great players. Eventually, the bill comes due, including on the quarterback, so they're going to have to make some really difficult decisions this offseason. If Brandon Ayuk had stayed healthy, he might be the odd man out. But because he's hurt, you can't trade Brandon Ayuk this offseason. It's going to be an interesting one. If you told me that Debo plays for a different team next year, I won't be surprised at all.
Do coaches and GMs count towards the salary cap?
They do not.
They do not. Okay.
They do not. Yep.
So you can pay coaches as much as you want, and it doesn't affect the.
That would be correct. Yes.
Interesting.
And GMs.
All right. Well, I'm just saying to everybody in Detroit, please give Ben Johnson as much money as he is asking for so he doesn't leave to go to another team.
GoFundMe on Ben Johnson.
You know what? Honestly, I would start that, and I would contribute to it. Field Yates.
We also, just one more shout out from the games yesterday. We don't give defensive players that much of a shout out. We were talking about the unusual lineman touchdown, but how about Cooper DeJean?
Oh my gosh.
Like upending Derrick Henry. Ooh. It was just such a feat of strength that you never see, because we talk about Derrick Henry running over people, through people, on top of people, and Cooper DeJean was like, no, and I'm going to lift you up and put you back down.
That's one of those like plays where when you're playing Madden with your friend and you hit stick Derrick Henry, they're like, there's no way that guy's actually going to do that to Derrick Henry. Except with Cooper DeJean, it actually happened.
It was just a fun highlight.
Eagles. Yes. Very impressive. Very impressive.
Eagles are looking too good.
Don't tell
I'm
Mike
nervous
Clay.
about it. Dude, they are looking fantastic.
Fascinating 5 weeks ahead.
Yep. All right, when we come back tomorrow, we obviously are going to dive into not only Monday Night Football, but our Week 14. Week 14.
Oh, my goodness.
Waiver wire.
Maybe. Yeah, we'll have a few.
Crazy. The show is presented by Wingstop. We love you guys. Don't forget to love each other. Be kind to yourself. You deserve it. And we'll see you tomorrow.